Your Bernina Binder Attachment number 88 is useful for far more than binding the edges of quilts. I'm Lori Broseski from Threadplay with Bernina in Denver, Colorado. I like to use my binder to create things like custom trims, like on this sweater edge, and then I can sew many different strips together using decorative stitches and brightly colored threads to create my own fabrics, like I used in this eyeglass case. I'll show you how I create my custom trims and fabrics. These are pictures of samples that I made for the custom trim on the sweater. I started testing some different colors of fabrics and then testing my sewing technique to attach all of those together. Now I did these out of bias fabric so that they could gently curve around the neckline of the sweater. And they also folded very nicely when I made these Chinese ball buttons for the attachment. This is another sample I made where I was testing out making a zigzag trim using flat sewn pieces of fabric that came out of the binder that I simply zigzagged and pinned onto the back of the trim and then did a straight stitch to sew those on. I decided that that was going to be a little too labor intensive to go all the way around the sweater, so I chose a different effect. And then this is a close-up of the fabric that I made using different widths of strips from the binder and then sewing them together using decorative stitches to create this eyeglass case for my friend Sarah in Tallahassee. I'll start by showing you how to make a trim like I used on that green sweater. The secret is this number 10 foot with a guide going right down the center in between the toes. This guide helps draw the fabrics together almost like magic without letting them overlap. I'm having to substitute fabrics here because I'm out of the original fabrics that I used for the trim on that green sweater. Now you'll want to cut your fabrics on the bias so that they can bend easily around the neckline or curves of your project. I also have my needle threaded with silk sewing thread because once pressed with a warm iron, that silk sewing thread melds so well with the fabric that it almost disappears. I will lift my presser foot up and notice that both of my hands are occupied here, so I can use my knee lift lever to raise my presser foot and push those fabrics on underneath the presser foot on either side of the fabric guide. I'm going to push them back just a little bit further. And I have my machine adjusted for a zigzag stitch. In this case, the width is 2.4 and the length is 2, so that's very narrow. All I want the thread to do is just nip on either side of those folds to draw the two pieces of trim together. You can see how the guide in the center of the foot works like magic to keep the fabrics from overlapping or spreading too far apart. I'll just sew from top to bottom here. I'm just kind of roughly guiding my fabrics underneath the foot, and I'm letting the guide on the number 10 foot do all of the work for me. Here's the end of my first two fabrics. And I'll grab my next fabric. This is a turquoise trim that I'll add as my third color. I'm just going to lay it right next to the first two that were sewn together. And so just as I did before, to create 3 rows. So here is some custom trim. I failed to mention that the silk thread comes in limited colors, so I just chose a dark brown, which once pressed will just kind of blend in with all of these fabrics and we'll never see it. You can kind of see some of those zigzag stitches because we're close up here, but when it's on a project, you'll never see that silk thread. Next, I'll show you how I use binder strips to make new fabric like I used on the eyeglass case. This is a piece that I've already started. I first made 2 different sizes of binder strips by running fabric through the 38mm binder and the 28mm binder. I randomly placed different colors and binder strip sizes next to each other for interest. I love how the decorative stitches span the entire width of the narrow binder strips while letting more of the fabric show on the wider strips. I chose a green Aurifil thread for the needle and bobbin for contrast on this piece. I'll use the number 10 edge stitch foot again and have fun with decorative stitches. I've had the best luck with stitches from the 300 series collection and the Quilting Decorative Stitches collection. I'm going to use stitch number 302 for this strip. Just like I did when I made the binder trim, I am going to raise my presser foot and put my left edge on the left side of the fabric guide and my right strip on the right hand side so that my fabric pieces are separated. Lower my presser foot and I will begin stitching stitch number 302. Another row complete. Now it's time to go find another fun stitch. You know, I didn't mention these stitches in the 700 series, but I really like to use stitch number 702. I'm going to select that for my last strip. And before I get started, let me point out, let me see if I can get this flat for you. Look at how the decorative stitches almost overlap this very narrow purple width here. Let me get my fingers up here where I can point that out. Whereas on the red strip that was wider, there's more of the fabric showing in there. So I think that makes a real interesting look. Let me grab my last strip here and get them lined up on either side of the fabric guide and begin stitching. Oh, my needle came unthreaded. I'll bet that never happens to you. Let me pause, I'll get that threaded and start again. Okay, here we go. This is going to be my last strip here. Okay, last row of decorative stitches. I finished adding all of my strips and now I'm at the ironing board. You eagle-eyed viewers will notice that I decided to add another strip out here just to be sure that my fabric was wide enough to make my eyeglass case. Now, if you look very closely, I know we're really zoomed in here. It may be kind of tough to tell, but I've got a curve to my fabric. This happens as we add strip after strip after strip. So I need to give this a good press and give it some tugging and kind of help straighten that out. So I will grab my iron and give this piece a good steam. I used my Laura Star ironing system because I can get so much steam out of the iron, and the board is actually a suction board so that it will suction all of the steam through the fabric so that I know that it's thoroughly penetrated. And now I'm just tugging my fabric and kind of patting it back into shape so that everything is nice and straight and lined up. That's getting a whole lot closer. Might give this edge another little tug. Now, one of the hard parts is to let this cool and dry before I move it. You've probably heard the term heat forgets and cool remembers. That applies in this case. So I'm going to let this fabric cool before I give it a good pressing from the back side. Now my fabric is thoroughly cooled and I want to press it from the back side to ensure that it's nice and flat. I've moved my fabric out of the way so that I can grab my wool pressing mat. If you've never used these wool pressing mats from OESD to maintain dimension in your embroidery and decorative stitches, you are missing out. You need to give this a try. Check with your local dealer, and if they don't have these in stock, see if they can order one in for you. This is the right side of my fabric. I'm going to flip it over so that I can press the back side. You know, what I didn't mention about the wool pressing mat is that because it is kind of spongy, I can actually place my iron on the back side of all of these beautiful stitches without flattening the dimension on the front side. So I'll grab my iron. I used lots of steam and very light pressure with my iron just to make sure that everything is nice and flat. And now I need to wait for it to cool again before I can pick it up. Now my fabric is cool. I can pick it up and flip it back over. And it is ready to begin making into another eyeglass case like this one for my friend Sarah. And this fabric is going to be used as really just the pretty shell of this eyeglass case with the lining and Peltex on the inside to provide the structure. So my decorative fabric doesn't have to take any of the stress. The lining and Peltex takes all of that stress, and the decorative fabric just gets to be pretty. I hope you'll use these ideas as a springboard for your own creative projects with your binder. If you live in the Denver area and you'd like to purchase a binder, please come see us at Thread Play with Bernina. If you live outside of our area, contact your local dealer. See you soon.